Alexandra, thank you very much for this nice, lovely introduction. So in this part of today's talk, I would like to say about this book that I co-authored with Anna Rosińska and Weronika Kloc-Nowak. Feel free to look at the copies of the book. So, to cut the long story short, Ethnomorality of Care is about migrants and their aging parents. This is a book about Polish migrants that migrate to the western part of Europe, mainly to UK. And they face several challenges because they come from a country with family care culture, of family care regime as well, and they come to countries in the west of Europe where the elderly care is different. The parents of those migrants that we studied during our research stay behind in Poland and they age in Poland, which obviously causes some challenges, and we were interested how people face those challenges, how they understand their situation. But before I move to the findings of the research, I would like to say about ethnomorality as a theoretical framework. So, to start with this neologism, the new word that we propose with my co-authors, ethnomorality. To explain it, we have to look at first morality. This is important because morality in each culture is, because care, in each culture is a morally loaded topic. There are some expectatives from the people who are thought about as carers or potential carers. There is several reasons why we use the prefix ethno. First of all, because of the methods. We believe that in order to understand the lived experience of care, it's necessary to use qualitative methods, such as observation, participant observation, in-depth interviews. The second reason why we use this prefix ethno is because we draw upon approaches in sociology such as ethnomethodology, an old approach from the prehistory of sociology that aimed to study the tacit, everyday, mundane methods of living the social reality and making sense of the social relations. And finally, this ethno takes us to ethnic diversity, but not only. We understand care as differing depending on different factors, such as ethnicity, gender, class, etc. And we will say about this during this talk. This all leads to the fact that we should think rather as ethnomoralities than one given ethnomorality. And those ethnomoralities will depend on different factors, as I said. Ethnomoralities of care that we understand as different lived experiences of care depending on the social circumstances of individuals involved in caring, both being cared for and caring for others. Ethnomorality of care looks not only at what usually research on elderly care has looked at. Normally, the studies of care look at care arrangements, that are the actions, that is the different forms of care that are being provided. We propose to include two other components, and those are moral beliefs and care intentions. We still look at care arrangements, and I will say about it during the part dedicated to the findings of the research. But we also propose to look at moral beliefs that surround care and the social meaning given to care. But by moral beliefs, we don't mean the culture of care that is usually thought about at the national level. But by moral beliefs, we mean what individuals think as morally correct about care. And then the third component of ethnomorality of care are intentions. So when we think about intentions, we should think about intentions of both potential caregivers or caregivers and care receivers. So when we think about caregivers, what does the caregiver envisages as care for their parent? When we think about care receivers, what an individual envisages as the care that he or she would like to receive? So those are the care intentions. And we believe that it's important to include them in the study of the lived experience of care, because at the end of the day, it is important what an individual would like to do rather than what he or she does. It needs to be contrasted. At the end of the day, this is what is the social meaning and experience of care. Ethnomorality of care includes not only family actors. A lot of study about transnational families only focuses on family caregivers. A lot of the study that has been done before looks at family caregivers who live, for instance, in Britain with their parents who age back in Poland, and these care arrangements are being studied. Our proposal is to look at the elderly person who is back in Poland, in this case, and to look at all the actors who are involved in the provision of care. So these will be family members, both close and distant kin in case of extended families, but also public institutions, market solutions, third sector, and informal, non-familiar individuals. Ethnomorality of care also proposes to look at care as dynamic and agentic, because there is many people who actually already receive care but are still caregivers to other individuals. This happens, for instance, to grandfathers and grandmothers who themselves are being cared for but also provide care to their grandchildren or their children. So this is something that we call care flows. The two-way interchange of care between the elderly person and other people in their social surroundings. And then the other dynamic element of ethnomorality of care are care sequences. And by care sequences, we mean different care arrangements of a person that evolve over time. So the study that we are presenting in Ethnomorality of Care was a research that, as Alexandra already said, we conducted at the Center of Migration Research at the University of Warsaw, not Warsaw. It was a research that involved 14 researchers, and our aim was to study the impact of international migration on aging in Poland. Although Poland is not normally thought about as an aging society, it will be rather Germany or Japan, it is. And there are two demographic processes that have contributed to rapid aging of the Polish society. First of all, declining total fertility rates that have been below the replacement levels since late 1980s. And second, intensive out-migration, especially intensive after 2004 EU enlargement. So we were looking with my colleagues in the project at the impact of migration on the aging of Polish society. And with co-authors of this book, Anna and Veronika, we were responsible for the work packages that were interested in the social consequences of aging and migration in Poland. That's why we conducted the part of the research that I will talk about in a bit. So in Poland, the impact of migration of the young family members has a potentially very big effect on caring over the elderly family members, because in Poland we have family culture of care. That means that culturally it is the family who is seen as responsible for care provision. First of all, spouse, but then also children. So first of all, family culture of care in Poland. That's an important element. And second important element is the family by default care regime. Family by default care regime obviously builds upon the family culture of care, and those are the institutions that are provided by the state that are in Poland not sufficient, not answering the needs, because family is idealized as the desired good, the family, the care provider. And by this I mean that family is seen as the as the provider of personal care, hands-on care, not about the other types of care such as emotional care. This of course as well, but there are no institutions in place that would provide personal care other than family in Poland. According to the statistics, 96% of elderly in Poland are only taken care of by their family members, close and more distant. Only 2% of people are in institutions in Poland. Whereas when migrants go to UK, for instance, they perceive the local care culture and care regime as very different than the Polish one. First of all, the care culture is seen as defamiliarized, and also care regime is seen as different, especially when migrants work in the care sector themselves. That's why we assumed that they might change their opinions, their beliefs, intentions, but also care arrangements as a result of being here in Britain. So, ethnomorality of care as a new and, I believe, complex approach toward care requires complex methods. And in this part, I would like to say about the research methods that we used and the research design that we implemented. As this research is about migrants and their aging parents who age back in Poland, this sets the model of transnational research as the desired one. So we conducted our research in Poland and in the UK. UK because the UK after 2004 EU enlargement received the biggest number of Polish migrants, over 1 million people migrated to Britain. And in Poland we conducted our research in 2 localities. The locality that is more in the west is named Kluczbork, and the locality that is in the eastern part of Poland, eastern central part of Poland, is named Konskie. I say this because then I will refer to these 2 names quite a lot. And as it was a transnational research, we followed migrants to Britain, migrants only from Kluczbork and from Konskie. We chose the Kluczbork and Konskie because of their size. There are both small towns of 20,000 inhabitants. We chose to study small towns with local authorities that would be responsible for care institutions that are in place, because we felt that we needed to be able to get a grasp of what was going on there. So I believe, and it also proved in my previous research, that a town of 20,000 inhabitants is one that you actually can study and understand a little bit what is going on there. So there is a range of caring institutions in both of them, which makes them comparable. And another similarity that was very important for our sampling of the towns was the fast pace of population aging. So Konskie and Kluczbork are among the localities in Poland that age at the fastest pace. But we also aimed at choosing towns with intense out-migration. And when choosing localities with intense out-migration, we refer to the expertise of Center of Migration Research when the research was carried out. However, we needed to find two comparable but different localities. And there are some differences between Kluczbork and Końskie that make the comparison interesting and that we believe that may affect the care arrangements, care beliefs, and care intentions of their inhabitants and migrants from the two localities. So first of all, the socio-economic situation of the two localities is different. Końskie, the town in the eastern part of Poland, has been badly hit by the economic transformation after 1989 because the town depended heavily on the foundry industry. And when the economic transformation happens in Poland, a lot of people lose their jobs, which has led to a lot of social problems that have affected also the quality of family bond. Whereas in Kluczbork, the economic transformation didn't have such drastic consequences, and the economic level of the population is just higher. The second important difference is the history of migration and history of culture. It's important to say that Kluczbork hasn't been within the Polish boundaries until 1945, when the frontiers of Poland changed. Then the part of Poland where Kluczbork is, that is called Opolszczyzna. Sorry for Polish difficult sounds. So Opolszczyzna becomes a part of Poland, but before there was a population of German origin, German-speaking population. So these individuals, some of them leave, some of them stay, and they still have access to German passports. That's why a lot of them used to migrate to Germany, also in the 70s and the 90s. That's why the migration is not a recent phenomenon in Kluczbork, which has been affected the family life of many people in that region for a lot of time now. Whereas in Końskie, the population was much more sedentary, and the locals started to migrate only after the EU enlargement, 2004, and the main destination country here was UK, as in many other parts of Poland. Opolszczyzna, the region where Kluczbork is, has been aware, and the authorities locally, they have been aware of the problem of aging of the population precisely because of migration to Germany for a lot of time. That's why for over a decade the local authorities have been working out, have worked out the solutions towards the aging of the population. Different institutions that provide care involving third sector organizations. All of these solutions have been worked out by the local authorities. Whereas in Końskie, local authorities have not been aware of the aging of population. To an extent that when we started our research, and when myself and my colleagues, when we went to talk to local authorities, they were surprised to hear that the population was aging rapidly. So we were interested how these differences in Kluczbork and Końskie into localities affect aged care and affect different ethnomoralities of care. This chart shows our research procedure. So we started with monographies of two localities in Poland. We started with desk research about the history of Końskie and Kluczbork. Then we started our field work and started observation. Our research was conducted between 2014 and 2015 in Kluczbork and in Końskie. And our research in Britain we conducted between 2015 and 2016. So when we started in 2014, we took with ourselves a group of students from the Institute of Sociology, and together we conducted two surveys. This research is a mixed method research that consists of a quantitative and qualitative part. Here I look at my students about methods that I tried to explain to them. So the first survey was among the households, and with the survey of households in both localities, we tried to understand the social economic situation, also family situation of the people from Końskie and Kluczbork, and we also believed, and it actually worked out pretty well, that the randomly chosen households would give us also contact to parents of international migrants and to migrants contacts to migrants in Britain. So this is how we conducted the monographies, the ethnographic study, the monography of Kluczbork and in Końskie. Also interviews and expert interviews with local authorities. This chart shows what methods are useful in the study of the three components of ethnomorality of care, that are beliefs, intentions, and care arrangements. In order to study care arrangements, we were looking at the local care diamond, as we call them, that involved a range of different care actors. As I said before, ethnomorality of care not only looks at family carers, it also looks at other actors that are involved in the production of care, that are public, private, third sector organizations, family members, and non-familiar individuals. So with these 5 groups, we conducted interviews, expert interviews, and also we conducted observation, for instance, at the institutions. But a very important part of this research, obviously, were the interviews with aging inhabitants of Końskie and Kluczbork, and interviews with migrants from these 2 localities. So let's start with the interviews with aging inhabitants of Końskie and Kluczbork. We conducted in-depth individual interviews with 52 parents of migrants. We complemented this with interviews with 24 people without children abroad. So for instance, people whose children live locally in Poland or who don't have children. We wanted to complement our sample, qualitative sample obviously, with people who do not have transnational families in order to be able to compare their situation. And it's important to mention that we were interviewing not only the oldest old of the inhabitants. We apply the social constructivist definition of aging. So we were actually looking at how the people define themselves. And in these 2 localities, people as young as 60 years old identify as old, for a set of different reasons. First of all, because they retired quickly. Also because of the experience of transformation, that their jobs were endangered, that's why they retired earlier. And secondly, because of their social and family roles. For instance, they become grandparents and they engage in activities typical for whom they define as old people. So we wanted to apply this emic definition of aging. But also it was important for this research that was interested in the families of migrants. And Polish migrants are still considerably young, and their parents are still considerably young. So as the Polish intensive migration started in 2004, and the people who were migrating were in their 20s, 40s at most, their parents still don't need care. That's why it's so important to study not only care arrangements, because sometimes parents of migrants don't need any personal care yet, but it's important to study the beliefs and care intentions of both sides, the parents and migrants, because it will help us to predict what will happen in the future. That's why we conducted our research among migrants. We were able to contact 31 migrants in Britain, 16 who came from Kluczbork and 15 from Konskie. As I said, our research, our fieldwork in Britain concluded in 2016 before the EU membership referendum. That's why, after the referendum, we decided to follow up with another wave of interviews that would grasp especially care intentions of Polish migrants that are informed by the results of 2016 referendum. And in 2018, when we conducted the second wave of follow-up interviews, we were able to contact 13 individuals. So it's important to mention that ethnomorality of care aims at matched samples, so at studying both a parent and the child in a given family, to get this stereo perspective, the perspective from both sides. So we were able to contact 11 such samples, and we called the samples family notes, because it's not always a pair. Sometimes it's more than 2 individuals. Sometimes we were able to reach a parent back in Poland and 2 children who are migrants in Britain. So we are able to contact 11 family notes, but ideally it could be more. But there were some practical challenges that we can talk about later on during the discussion. So now I would like to give just what I call sample of findings, because I don't want to overtake this book launch and to want to give some more space for this discussion. But afterwards we can talk about more about the findings, and here just a grasp of them. So let's start with care beliefs. Care beliefs of the participants of our research mainly reflect what the Polish culture of care is. The people believe that it is the family who should provide personal care to their aged family members. And here we've got the results of the survey that we conducted among the pupils of the last grade of all high schools in Kluczbork and Końskie. So we were able to contact whole population of the students of the last grade of high schools in the 2 localities, and the youngest generation supports this family model of care. What is interesting here is the gender division, that girls believe more strongly that it's children's duty to help parents when they grow old. So overall, the participants of our research believe that family members should provide care to their aging parents. But when we asked migrants about what they envisage as care for their parents, we were surprised with the results. We were surprised with care intentions, because they contradicted the overall beliefs of the participants in our study. So let me give you an example of this. When we asked, let's say, female migrant, if she was going to care for her mother in the future, we would give such a response. No, I'm not going to do that because my brother who lives in Poland will do that. Or another example. When we asked a male migrant, he would say, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to relocate my parents here to Britain because they wouldn't be happy here. So we were very interested in the fact, first of all, that the people felt obliged to explain themselves. Rather than just say that they're not going to do that, they were giving explanations, and I'm using these explanations not in a morally loaded form, just when we look at this as an discursive acts. They were feel obliged to excuse themselves or justify themselves, why not, and naming who will be a better provider of care. We found particularly useful to study care intentions, the frame that Scott and Lyman 50 years ago called social accounting frame. So social accounting frame. Scott and Lyman say that when people find that their actions are in contradiction to what is morally desirable, they feel the need to explain, justify their action. And this explains, justify the way they justify it. This is what Scott and Lyman call social accounts. So when we looked at the declarations of migrants in our study, we realized that social accounts are pretty common and that some of them repeat. In the first wave of our research, we identified 7 basic accounts for intentions, and the 2 that I gave to you, the first one was an example of the local sibling as the by default caregiver, and the second one that I gave to you was the appeal to parents' well-being. The parent won't be happy in Britain because, for instance, they don't speak English. Another example that I would like to give to you, and this explains why I put this image here, is what we call moral equation of care. Let's go together to Norwich, where Marek lives. Marek is another interview partner in our research. So I asked Marek if he was going to provide care to his mother and father who live in Końskie. So he said, no, I'm not going to do this because my sister who needs them more will do that. And it was really surprising why the sister who needs them more will do that. If she needs them, why should she provide care to the parent? So the situation is that the sister lives in a Polish city that is far from Końskie but still in Poland, and the sister has small children, and the aging parents provide care to their children. That's why now they're providing care the parents are providing care, so the sister in the future will have to repay the debt. And that's the equation. Obviously a figurative equation, but still. When we looked at care arrangements, we found a whole variety of care arrangements. So, as we are sociologists, we decided to provide a typology. And this typology is pretty simple. There are 2 dimensions: the intensiveness of care and complexity of care. The intensiveness of care is measured in the number of hours that are provided on a daily or weekly basis, and the complexity is measured by the number of individuals who are engaged in the provision of care. So we found limited care, where there is a few actors, or typically 1 actor, for instance a spouse, who is providing short hours of care. Principal care provider is the situation where there is, for instance, again, a wife who is providing intensive hours, round-the-clock help, for instance. Then, loose network of care is, but let's look at an example. This is a situation of a loose network of care. When we have a complex situation, a lot of actors involved in the provision of care, but still short hours. So, for instance, Krystyna lives in Końskie. She has a son in Końskie and daughter in London. They both provide limited numbers of hours and different types of care. So the son provides personal care about an hour every week, and the daughter talks with Krystyna on the phone, sends her gifts, sends her money. There are also informal individuals, such as neighbors and colleagues, who provide personal care. And there is also a very important component that is self-care, when Krystyna organizes a lot of care for herself and engages many different individuals. Let's compare it with a dense network of care. Let me take you to Kluczbork, where Margarete lives. So Margarete, she has a very serious medical condition. She needs 24-hour support, and this is available because of a set of different actors that are family actors, non-familiar individuals, but also market solutions and public institution. She shares accommodation with her daughter-in-law and grandchildren. They provide her personal care, especially at night, when the carers from public institution and privately hired carer do not come, because they are with Margareta during the day when the daughter-in-law is at work. Margareta also has a daughter in Germany, and the daughter in Germany sends her what we call emotional gifts that are not necessarily objects that Margareta requires, that she needs, but rather something like a keepsake to show that she cares about Margareta. So as you can see, a lot of different individuals that engage intensively. But it's important to mention that when we looked at what we call care sequences, we realized that when we analyze it longitudinally during a lot of time, a loose network of care, like this one, if needed be, because the health is deteriorating, can be mobilized and can evolve into such intensive care, a dense network of care. When we analyzed the situation of elderly parents of migrants, but also elderly people in Kluczbork and Końskie who do not have children abroad, we realized that what is important is not necessarily the geographical distance between the children and the parent. What is important are the family biographies of care and the quality of family bond that existed in a given family for a lot of time. Because if this is high quality, then the younger generation will engage regardless of the distance. We also find interesting the impact of gender that is not so self-evident as a lot of study shows it, explaining that it is the woman who is more burdened. When we analyze the intentions, it's very interesting that male and woman are equally positioned as the caregivers in the intentions of migrants. The social economic dimension is very important. More affluent families were not common in our study because of the country where we conducted our study, but also because of the, in general, the the economic standing of the two towns. However, we realized that the families who are in better financial condition can engage more actors, can engage also market solutions, and the quality of care is much higher. And what we find very important are the regional differences. The care beliefs, intentions, and care arrangements are different in Kluczbork and in Końskie. So it's really important to take the regional characteristics into account before saying that our research is representative for the whole country, because it's never representative. It is always a representation of given characteristics. And just to finish this part of the book launch, I would like to provide some opportunities for further research that could use the ethnomorality of care. For instance, this approach, I believe, can be used for the study of childcare, both in migrant families but also families that live locally. We studied transnational families, but it's also a useful framework to study internal migrations, when people are in different regions where care can be conceptualized differently. And finally, we can take into account not only spatial mobility, but also social mobility. For instance, what happens with ethnomoralities of care with the social mobility of members of the same family, for instance, when they climb up the social ladder. So those definitely are the possible fields to explore. I believe ethnomorality of care can provide a useful framework for that. Thank you very much for your attention, and I hope for the discussion.
Thank you, Agnieszka, for that absolutely marvelous presentation. And Well, lovely way of launching the book. I think that this book launch will not be complete without your participation. So I'm going to invite Alexandra Galasinski, who's also a member of LPS, to come and chair a discussion where you're free to make your comments, ask questions, observations, and particularly on the last part, which Agnieszka helpfully suggested, of how we can extend the framework of ethnomorality of care to maybe properly use it in other areas. It'd be wonderful if you have ideas of where you think you might want to use it. So, Alexandra, I'll just put chairs here.
Thank you very much, and that was fascinating.
Okay, and for those who don't know me, my name is Professor Meena Thanda. I'm sorry, I should have said at the start, and I lead the Language, Power and Society, and Tom Dickens, who's the deputy, and there are several members of the group who are here. So I'll leave it to you, Anna.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, and the floor is yours now, and I'm looking for a lot of questions, but maybe I will start discussion. Agnieszka, because I've been interested in this complex model of how you put beliefs and intention and arrangements in this fantastic triangle, and what I observed is just that beliefs and intentions, they were looked at from the kind of point of view of storytelling. There were narratives, there were words. That's completely different from arrangement, which is in the domain of action. Yeah? So I wonder whether this aspect of telling us something is not also associated with what we can call resistance in narrative. And I wonder whether there is element of resistance in carers living in abroad in their narratives. Not only explanation that, oh, okay, I will not give this care because my sister lives nearby, but also in terms of resisting a dominant cultural narrative which is associated with these beliefs that family members should care for their elderly in Poland. So this element of, being, as you mentioned already, that there is this change of perception of caregiving by those who live abroad. Whether this element of social remittance is already kicked in the kind of accounts of possibilities of caregiving in the future. I'm especially interested in this resistance aspect within the story.
Yeah, it's a very good question. And a very good observation that beliefs and intentions are more like a discursive action, whereas arrangements are, we can say, actions or even behaviors. But still, we have to bear in mind that sometimes it's difficult to observe what is happening in the families. So we realized, just to start with, we realized that sometimes the answer to our question about the arrangements, we shouldn't take it at a face value. Sometimes people say about their family arrangements, and we can think that they differ from actually what they do. And how do we know it? Because when we were able to conduct interviews in family notes, the situation was that we knew from one family member and from the other family member that the situation, those two narratives were different about the care arrangement. So actually, especially when we conduct interviews, it's only declarative. So the three components, if we try to get to know about them only through interviews, and it's not accompanied by the observation, it's all just a narrative actually. But still, our research was there in the field, and we were with the elderly, just with them in their houses, so we could add to the interviews what we observed during the interview, which sometimes we came back to our interviewees. So here we could juxtapose the declarations about arrangements, and also what we observed, and we were taking notes. Obviously, it's very interesting what you say, that the intentions that proved so surprising to us are just narrative declarations, and they can be an example of resistance. But still, it also applies to beliefs. And when talking about their beliefs, they align with the family culture of care. So there is this tension between their own beliefs that still align with the family culture of care in Poland, that it is the family members who should provide care to the family members in need. Yet intentions are different. So it was really interesting to see this tension between the two levels, although both of them are just narrative.
Thank you. Is there any other questions?
Yeah, I'll start because I need to be soon. Very interesting. I had the opportunity to go through your book in the last 2-3 days, and well, I have so many comments, both from a personal point of view, as a migrant myself, and also professionally speaking. So, personally speaking, I mean, I come from Italy, and we have a very similar situation. And what I get from your book is a big, broad reflection about the concept of family and how it is different when we, for instance, find ourselves in different countries with different social norms and different beliefs. So that's one point that I think could be even developed more. So this big reflection around family. The other thing is, for instance, talking about Italy, I think it does ignore that we have when we talk about care of families, which is age. In my case, I'm the eldest one, 2 children, and the other 2 brothers, every time, tell me it's your responsibility because you are the eldest. So whatever happens, you have to run. Okay, so that's another component, for instance, we have. I mean, let me close because otherwise I don't want to take too much time. So, professionally speaking, have you thought about a comparative framework coming from this research and make it a bit broader in terms of looking at different countries, Europe or maybe even beyond Europe? Because I think this research is really timely. I think there is a need to understand what's going on in terms of care for migrants. So, yeah, that's my final question.
Shall I answer now? Or
Yeah.
would you like- So thank you very much for your 2 comments that you started with. It definitely tells us a lot about the family, who are family members, who are the good ones and who are the bad ones, and how do you negotiate still being the good one in spite of living abroad. So it's not easy at all. That's why a lot of people send these emotional gifts to show that they actually care about their family members. And you mentioned that something that is very important, the age. That he didn't mention. I said about the importance of the socioeconomic situation, gender, but age is also important, and I think it will differ from culture to culture. Sometimes there will be more burden on the eldest family member, but sometimes maybe on the youngest, because they will say, she's the son of her mom, she has always been the loved one because he's the youngest, that's why he should repay the debt. Moral equation of care. Again, so answering your question about my future plans and also the plan of my colleagues, actually we were planning to conduct a 5-year research project about ethnomorality of care in the families of Polish migrants, both internal and international migrants who are in 2 different countries. And it wasn't my bit. It was Anna Rosińska, my co-author, who proposed such a research, but she wasn't successful. So we weren't able to start with this research. And currently I'm conducting a different research, but maybe in the future it's definitely a huge field for exploration. And something that will not finish because the societies are aging.
Thank you. That was really very interesting. And as a migrant from India, I could see plenty of what you were saying actually as applicable to outside Europe as well. So certainly you do that. But my question kind of links to what you were saying about resistance and intentions. And I was going to rephrase it in terms of perception. That did you find that where you interviewed, say, the children abroad and say the parents and other family members in Poland, was the perception of what you were the perception of the migrants as to how much care they were providing, was that overinflated or understated? Because in housework research we know that people do often tend to say they do more than they actually do, and there's a gender element to that as well. The men tend to overinflate the amount of housework they do compared to women. Mm-hmm. So I mean, caring, that also includes that. So I was just wondering if you found differences there, and whether if you send money or gifts back from here, how that is perceived as equivalent to actually providing physical care in the country.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's actually a very broad question, I think. So if I don't answer any part of this, just we can continue, or just remind me what I didn't answer. So I think there is a lot of things that I could answer here. Maybe start with how money is perceived. It is perceived as a type of care. So this talk, I focused mainly on the personal care, but in book we really underline the importance of other types of care, such as material, financial care, also emotional care, and you could see it on our charts that people talk on the phone, and it's also a way of caring, because we adapt here what we call care contact continuum. That sometimes just calling your mom can be a way of contact, but maybe with time it changes also to aware of caring about and for her. So interestingly, when we ask the people what is care, because that was one of the questions that appeared in our interview guide, we oftentimes receive the answer that it's not only about giving a glass of water and not only about feeding, the very technical actions. It's also about giving a call. It's also about writing together, like texting, for instance. So, and this type of answer we obtain both from parents and migrants. So it is definitely not underestimated by parents and migrants. I think maybe local siblings will have a different take on that. But when we look at these two perspectives of the parent and migrant, definitely different than the personal care, different types of care also are important. So for instance, in the case of one of the interviewees, the lady who has a daughter abroad. So here the daughter who lives in London sends money to Christina. And what she does is to give money to son. So it's very interesting because she does it in secret. The mother thinks that the daughter doesn't know about it, but we know from the interview from the daughter that she knows about it. But it also shows the flaws between the family members. So the son who actually lives locally and who can provide personal care, he also engages, but in a way is being paid for by the daughter and his sister who lives in London. It's also important to mention that when we look at care arrangement, and this is something that I didn't have time to elaborate during my talk, is coordination of care and delegation of care. And this is something that migrants engage in. So for instance, they delegate care to the local actors who are available locally, either siblings or non-familiar individuals, etc. So they delegate care to people who are available locally, and then they coordinate different actors to make sure that the care is orchestrated in a feasible and a way that makes sense. So definitely, both ends of this situation, parents and migrants, know about the importance of different forms of care.
I was intrigued, Agnieszka, that you didn't mention, this is Poland after all, you didn't mention, unless I missed it, the church at all. I just wondered, apart from presumably providing spiritual sustenance, does the church do anything? I mean, I noticed in your book you refer to something, the Catholic Charismatic Renewal Community, but does the church not do any practical, offer any practical sort of assistance? Or?
So when thinking about church, we should remember about Caritas, which is one of the biggest NGOs in Poland, but it works globally. So Caritas is an important actor that also provides personal care. Also, in some of the Polish localities, 24/7 care homes, and this is provided by church. The organization that you mentioned is also important for some of individuals, but only the most religious ones. So that the people who engage in the Catholic Charismatic Renewal Community, and those individuals could count with the support. What church provides for some of the elderly that age back in Poland is the opportunity for sociability. So, for instance, the rosary groups, especially they're highly there are women who predominate in those groups who collect once a week or every day to pray over the rosary in the church. So it constitutes groups of friends who provide at least they talk to each other. So this is the importance. But other than that, no. So, for instance, in our graphs in the book and the chart that I showed here on the slides, church is not shown per se, but as a third sector organization. Some of these third sector organizations will be the religious ones.
Phil? And,
Question following on from Tom, actually. Really intrigued by your triangle, but I'm really interested in the morality bit. Tom's just mentioned the church. What about other religions? What about other cultures? Would you have the same in different cultures that everybody feels responsible for their parents? Or are there some cultures where people actually don't feel responsible for their parents? I've met people who think, well, it's not my responsibility to look after my parents. I'm just wondering whether you came across any cases like that at all.
So in our research that was done in Poland, majority of people were either Catholic or agnostic. Over 90% of Polish people are Catholics. So it contributes to the specificity of this research, but definitely opens the ground for different research that could be also conducted in a different, in a culturally different environment. So definitely, you're right. The religion and culture in general very much affects the value of filial obligation towards the parents. So it will vary, and I want to think about any of our interviewees if they weren't Catholics, and cannot think about anybody. But I can imagine that in some religious groups where the people are socialized to be more individualistic, I think this is also the British case, it will be different.
Martin?
Thanks, Agnieszka, for being the reason for this fabulous event, and I just want to make a broader point of the value of this university and all universities of Marie Curie fellowships, and it's just the perfect example of why they're so important. And I can just add one thing to the contributions. My students were lucky enough to hear one of Agnieszka's lectures, So there are contributions to undergraduate education as well. So it's a chance to thank you for that. But I do have a question as well, and I'm from a politics background, so forgive if it's not a reasonable question, but it's really about something about the role of church. I'm really thinking more about the role of government, and the Law and Justice Party. They have a kind of bad reputation, at least outside the country, for being authoritarian and other issues to do with rule of law and values. So they have a kind of right-wing image on politics. But in economics, it seems like the popularity, or in economic policy, the popularity is kind of underpinned by this communitarian and strong expansion of social welfare provision. And so I just wanted to know if you have any thoughts about whether this has impacted on social care. I know pensioners have received extra payments, and there's been extraordinary child benefit supplements. But have the welfare policies of law and justice manifested themselves into sort of better infrastructure for social care and maybe more sustainable social care programs that are relevant for what you're talking about?
Thank you
if
very
that's
much.
not your topic, then fair enough.
Yeah, it is. Like it's. I think there are not reasonable questions, and this one is particularly valid and important. So there have been a couple of changes introduced by Law and Justice Party over the last 4 years that have affected the quality of life of seniors, and that have affected their, let's say broadly, life worlds. The first and the most important one is the change in retirement age. And it's a huge change because the retirement age was equal for men and women in Poland, and it was 67 years. So when the Law and Justice comes to power, they change the retirement age for women to 60 and 65 for men. So we don't have this gender equality anymore, and moreover, it takes females from the labor market very early, which I think very much inscribes into this communitarian expansion, as you called it, because obviously when women withdraw from the labor market as early as at the age of 60, what should they do? They should care for their grandchildren, because this is their place back home. So this is a very interesting way of positioning women, but also very much contributes to this image of babcia, that is the grandmother. Yeah. So there have been several changes. You mentioned the importance of the financial transfer towards also the elderly. So the most important transfer is for the people who have young children, but also last year the Polish pensioners received what they called, the Polish government called it the 13th pension. Yeah, so not only 12, but we have 13th month just for the retired people. But it really very much shows the low incomes of the Polish pensioners and the need for economic transfers to help. Also free of charge medicines for people 75 and over. So it does affect the quality of life of the people, the financial transfers. But when it comes to organization of care, nothing has been done really. So the previous government that we had started a project that was called Senior Vigor, which is like healthy old person, and those are day centers for the elderly, mainly for sociability, but also thought about as, for instance, centers of rehabilitation, for like physical rehabilitation for the elderly people. This project was not successful under the previous government, but now it seems that it operates better because there has been some additional influx of money. It's not so much about providing personal care and taking off the burden from the families, but more about making sure that the elderly people have some opportunity to socialize outside of the household. And it works well, not only in big cities, but also in smaller localities.
And we have time for one question.
Very brief, and you can take it as broad and narrow as you wish. So my question is the care of the elderly a factor, and to what extent, in the decision to migrate?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. And it can work both ways. It can actually facilitate migration. I mean, not care. I mean, it can facilitate migration when we think about the necessity, for instance, to earn more money to organize care. For instance, in the families where there are some siblings who stay in Poland, and then there is one who is being like delegated, and this is the new the new economy of migration household. But also, the quality of family bond can contribute to migration because of some family problems, family situation that actually leads to migration. Migration scholars, we tend to think about migration only as driven by economic factors, and it's a total misunderstanding of the process. Because the importance of the family relations, the importance of love is huge in the decisions to migrate. So it has to be taken into account. But of course, the prospective care or the care that is already needed can also stop some people from migrating. And I know people who refrained from migration because of the feeling that they needed to stay in Poland or any other country in order to be close to their parents.
Thank you. That's exactly what I was expecting.
Thank you very much, Agnieszka. That was fascinating, and I hope everyone enjoyed the event. So thank you very much.
Announcement. Thank you all for being here for this group, and we are planning the next public event, hopefully public event, which will be around Valentine's Day in February, I should say, and it is going to be on marriage.
Love and marriage.
Marriage, norms and deviation. Yeah, it's also connected with migration, but also, there are norms and deviations on the question of marriage, and marriages across borders, and relationships across borders. So that's what we will do in February. So look out for it. We'll send you invitation. If you've done your feedback, maybe you want to leave your email address, and it is your permission. If you allow us, we will contact you on that. On that number. I must say, I took a couple of photographs. If anyone has any objections to me using any of that picture I took of the audience for maybe a news item, please let me know, and I will not use them. But if you don't have any objections, and if they come out okay on my tiny little phone, then I might use them. So thank you all again for being here.
Thank you.